Welcome to Behind the Scenes at ID8 Studios, the place where we explore the art of producing art. I'm Steve Sue, this is Crystal Bocchi, and this is Alex Bocchieri. Welcome, Alex.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, so we're going to talk today about tips for writer and director collaborations. You are a director extraordinaire, we know that. And you recently finished a picture where you directed somebody else's writerly work.
Yes, I did. I recently completed a project at Disney where I had to work with the writer, and I've done numerous short films over the years and a feature film that were where I had to collaborate with the writer. And so it's I know like a lot of people who might be watching this, if you come from the independent film world, you're kind of used to doing everything yourself.
Yeah.
You're used to just having final say on everything as the filmmaker. And I say filmmaker because you're more than just a director. In the indie world, you're kind of doing everything. But then you'll find yourself, which is kind of more the norm when you're working on bigger projects, is that there's going to be a writer there. And they a lot of times have been on a project longer than you. And they have been thinking about what this movie is longer than you have. And so they're going to have a lot of strong opinions. And I think the key, and this just is good advice for life in general, not just for these sorts of collaborations, is you have to establish what the relationship is and just be very upfront when you first start working together. What I mean by that is there are writers who they've written a script, they give it to the director, and now it's the director's vision. Whatever they want to do, they take it from there, and you just move on and you make your movie. But then there's going to be sometimes where a studio or whoever's funding a project is going to say, okay, we hired this writer, we love their story, what they say has just as much weight. So you just need to establish that right up front before you start going.
There's no written rules.
There's not. And then
does it go contractual?
It definitely can. And more than that, though, like you got to just think about the politics of things, your relationships. If producers really love a story, really love a script, really love what is written, you're not going to want to come in there and just change everything.
Yeah.
You're going to have to work within that framework.
Well, because they paid a writer for a reason, and that's their craft, right?
They did, but then sometimes the director comes in and they love their style more than they love what is written, and they want you to make it your own. So I've definitely been in both situations. I think for me, when I first meet the writer and I read their script, and now I'm going to start to kind of pick their brain a bit, figure out what motivated them to make the choices that they made. You can kind of get a sense for what is personal, like what they really care about, what was like the heart of their idea, and what was just plot, things that they're expecting director to translate it to visual medium. Yeah. And they don't really have a strong opinion on where it's gonna or what things are gonna look like. And so when you see those areas, that's when, well, for me, I dive in and I try to make my mark there. And then just when I hit those really important thematic moments that they've been gestating on for maybe a year before I even came on the project, I'll get their input and I'll really make sure that they're involved in the process of making a lot of those choices.
Okay, so full disclosure, we're all working on a picture together. Alex is directing, I'm writing, Crystal is producing, cinematographer. So we actually are experiencing this, and I have found you to be nothing but honorable and respectful. And I often question, like, I write something in the script and will it actually happen or not? But you have been completely open, and I kind of feel like a hallmark to this type of relationship is trust, because I want you to plus everything I wrote, because I don't want to look like an idiot, like, no, that completely didn't belong there. And so I would think that it's so much, it has to rely on the relationship of trust.
Yeah, and that's part of what you're trying to establish when you first meet them, is understanding how they like to work. And once you know what the relationship's going to be like are they going to want to be having a say in what people look like, what the settings are, all that sort of thing. You just establish trust at that point. But I think what's really important to remember for anyone directing something, that like when you're given a script, is just remember that the writer is the first person who's watched this movie. They've seen it in their head. They've already watched it 1,000 times, and then you're coming in and a lot of times you have a fresh perspective and your own taste, but they have a clear vision a lot of the times. Otherwise, they couldn't have.
But we all have
it.
different visions, because I think that's one of the things I always learn with novelistic writers. They write it, but everybody interprets it differently, and each reader can have a different image painted in their head.
Yeah.
So a director could have a very different image than what a writer was thinking.
It's true, and that's why I like to have the writer involved in the process of bringing the script to life, because they've seen it. A lot of times, if they're not involved and you make a strong visual choice, whether it's it could even be just like the color of the costume someone's wearing, or the set doesn't allow for sunlight. Maybe that it's in a covered area, and maybe that actually was supposed to pay off later in the film, but because you, as the director, you're trying to juggle so many things that you can get a little bit too granular and too just focused in on like, what are we doing today? What looks good today? And you lose a sense of that bigger picture. But because the writer has seen the whole movie in their head before, that's when you can look to them and say, hey, like I have to decide a location right now. Like, they've put these pictures in front of me. Like, is this going to fit, later down the road? And you've got that like collaborator who can be right next to you and actually see things at a deeper level than anyone else on set is going to be able to. Well, and you have
some of those people below you on the crew. So, for example, a scenic designer, the production designer, or the costume designer. All those people are participating in the interpretation of that original story.
Yeah, and that's actually why I love having the writer around. You'll actually look around on the internet or just listen to interviews from different directors and things. Especially in the studio system, the writer a lot of times is just like, once they turn in that final draft, they're not around.
Got paid.
It's the director's show going forward, and I never really understood that. For the exact reason you just said, you've got tons of people on every level of production that have a lot of questions, and that's the main job of a director is answering all their questions to make sure that the vision is cohesive, and without. Right now, or at least in the pre-production stage, the only other person who knows what the movie looks like, what the story is, the key points that you need to hit, is the writer. So for my projects, my most recent project especially, I had the writer with me every step of the way.
The Disney project.
The project I did at Disney, we had from casting to costume, locations, and it was actually a luxury that I could turn to him and say, is this fit? Like, does this feel cohesive? Does this feel like we're telling the same story, the story that we're setting out to make? And it's great. So when I hear other directors who are just like, have this like, no, I'm the boss, like everything goes through me, like I'm not gonna hear any of the other what everyone else has to say. It just never made sense to me. It's too much to manage.
In your experience, do most directors have really good people skills or listening skills? You do. I mean, you're an amazing person to work with, but I don't know. Do other directors have as much latitude?
That's hard for me to say broadly, but especially if you came up through the indie world, you kind of have to be that really strong singular voice sometimes, because you're fighting so many different things. And then by the time you get to that level where you have some money and you have a bigger crew and you're forced to collaborate with hundreds of people, it's really hard to delegate. It's really hard to hear people, because you're in that survival mode of like, I just got to get this done. And to get to the point where you can like relax and trust people to do their job, once you get there, I feel like those directors are great listeners. And when I've seen them on set, they're not stressed out because they trust other people on set. It's the ones that don't trust anybody and like, oh, I have to have my fingers in every little thing that happens on set, from the AD department who's organizing things to, costuming. And then even to the writer, it's just like, I don't trust the writer to answer questions for me. I need to go do it myself. Those are the guys that are way more stressed out.
Yeah, sure.
And are too closed off to hear what's happening.
It's interesting because I remember in the theatrical world, I think the writer has ultimate say. Like you can't change a line. If it's dialogue in a play, no change. It completely set. But now the antithesis of that is like TV, where writers go and they write it, they leave.
So
right?
that's actually movies. So in the movie world, that is. In TV, the writers are, it's much more like theater. Writers are actually the king in television because, well, for one, writers are usually also the producers, and like the showrunner and is usually also the writer.
So they're higher on the food chain.
They're higher, and also in episodic television, they are there the entire run of the show. They're there every week. And so they know what's going to happen 8 episodes from now. Well, if it's a good show.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Whereas the director comes in for an episode or 2 and then is off. So it's kind of inverse. And I don't have experience in that world. But when I'm talking about movies, the way it's structured is still the director's the king. And even in the project that I did at Disney, it still did come down to, at the end of the day, it was what I wanted. And I could put my foot down and say, this is what I want. I was very fortunate that I never had to do that because, well, the script was really great. And then I was working with a writer who was very patient as well. So I could articulate fully to the writer, the producers, everyone else involved, what I was going for and why. And it always kind of worked out that way. But I've had projects in the past where the writer didn't agree with choices I was making on set, and would come to me and say, this I don't see what you're doing, and on set things get very hectic, and you're always against the clock, and I've had to say, just trust me on this. Like, I haven't let you down before. Just trust me, like it's going to work out.
That's a good tip. What do you say if you disagree? Just trust me on this.
Yeah. So if I don't have time to explain, I've had to say, don't trust me. But I always try to explain because I want to have my ideas challenged in a healthy way and not in a way that they're being petty. I've never felt, and I've seen this maybe more in the client-side commercial world, which we're not talking about, but where people just have like their pet thing that they just want you to do, even though it's like stupid, and they'll force you to do it. But it usually, at least I've had great experiences, you start to talk and you understand like the root thing of what they actually want, and then like, okay, we're okay, and then I can explain like why I'm making the choices I'm making, whether it's like directing the actors, their performance, how they're saying the lines that somebody else wrote. That's usually where conflict comes in, is if someone wrote a line, they wrote a little monologue, they've heard it a certain way, and then I'm telling them to do it a different way. If I've got the time, I'll ask the actor to do it again their way, if I have the time. If I don't, I'll explain why I want it to be done this way. And usually and then, I've had those moments where we're an hour behind, sun's going down. I was like, you just have to trust me, and it's never been me yet. Yet.
Okay, good. So I was gonna say, that's the horror BTS, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely made choices in the moment and said and it didn't work out, but it wasn't. That's just how it goes. That's just how it goes sometimes. Not everything's gonna work out exactly how you want it to.
So what percentage of the time for film shoots that you've been on that the writer is present for the shots?
Yeah. So I've done about one feature and about 4 shorts now that somebody else wrote. And I always I'll say for the Disney project, it wasn't required. They actually weren't paying for the writer to come set. They were done after they finished the development of the script, and I actually put in a request and said I want them there. So for me every project I've always had the writer there.
So did the writer get paid to go on set, or it was just an invitation to?
It was an invitation. He wanted to be there.
That's
so
good.
And most of the time, I've just talking to other writers, they would want to be involved. They'd want to be involved as much as you're going to let them be involved, because like that's a lot of investment. It's a lot of personal, just like you put your heart into something and you want to see it.
So what about through post? How active do you like to see a writer in that process?
Oh, that's a good question, actually, because
That's my job, Alex.
Because yeah,
You should have asked that question, Crystal.
yeah. I mean, a lot of times they won't. Yeah,
Please. That's
yeah.
right.
No, I mean, because they're onto their own things too, and like I don't see a structure. I haven't seen a contractual thing where I've seen the writer is involved in the post as much as they come in for cuts and give notes on the cuts. And so that's mostly what I've had. But I've also, I'll give an example. This most recent Disney project, it was feeling a little bit long, and it's actually a short film as part of an anthology, and it just was feeling a little long, and I couldn't figure out what to cut. And so I actually asked the writer to come in, and we looked at some of the dailies, so that's just different takes of things that could maybe compress it. But he watched it and he was like, just cut out the first 2 minutes of the movie. Just start the movie 2 minutes in to where you have it. And that was multiple pages of stuff that I would not let myself cut, because I was like, it's already short. And we spent a lot of time doing it, and I could tell, and I knew the writer loved it too. So I just felt like a certain obligation to try to make it work. But to have someone who wrote it, envisioned it, and put so much of himself in it, to look at it and be like, oh no, that's the slow part. And we did it, and it works so much better. And it's a choice I never would have made on my own. And I don't think the producers even would have been comfortable saying, cut this whole beginning out, because
hence the value of collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so we actually had that with our picture on the trailer. Remember, we cut that first scene out of it, and it became so much more galvanizing without that.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately that collaborative moment, yeah, you're right. You have to have the license to be open-minded,
Totally.
but also the eyeballs for fresh set eyes on it, right?
It's true. And obviously, this is probably could be another topic, but having, you got to choose who you're going to bring in as a collaborator wisely, because a lot of people have strong opinions, and they'll say things that will get stuck in your head, but it actually is not going to make the project better. So because I had established all this trust with the writer throughout the process, I could take his advice unquestioned, be like, yes, let's try it, when they say something, rather than a producer or something who was never involved, just in name, and then they come in and they watch a cut and then they say something, and in your mind you'd want to appease someone, but then I talked to the writer, I talked to the producers who are actually there every day.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh no, don't do that. I can tell you love what you have, so just stick with it. So being able to filter that, the writers can be a part of that process. So I think it is to everyone's advantage, if you're a director and you're working on a script with the writer, to keep them involved in the process, even more than your DP, who everyone assumes is your sidekick. Your cinematographer is they're the one who's bringing your story to life. I think even more than them, the writer is going to have insight into the visual choices you're making, how it's telling the story. And so I think it's to everyone's advantage to get them really involved.
Brilliant. Alex, thanks for that wisdom. If you're a writer of screenplays, get with this guy, because he will make your stuff come to life. I promise you. Alex, where can they find you?
You can just go to my website. It's abocchieri.com, abocchieri.com, or just Google my name. I'm sure it'll come up.
All right, Alex. And for Crystal and Steve at Behind the Scenes at ID8, you can find us at id8studios.org or on social at id8.studios.